So today I want to talk about the Hoover Dam, droughts, and monsoons. Well, here we are talking about climate again. I really hadn't expected to jump back onto this topic so soon, especially after covering the issue of climate change in literally every video I put out last week. However, there are a few issues occurring around the Colorado River and its surrounding areas that are worth noting and spending some time talking about. The truth of the matter is that the area around the Colorado River has been in a drought for at least 20 years. The best place to see this is actually in the Hoover Dam's Lake Mead. And like most issues in this region, this too is exacerbated by climate change. Now we have here that the Hoover Dam's Lake Mead has actually hit its lowest water level since the 1930s. This reservoir generates electricity and supplies water to about 25 million people across tribal lands, farms, and major cities. This dam was formed by damming the Colorado River. The body of water is technically a reservoir of the Hoover Dam. As of last week, the reservoir was just 200 feet above dead pool level. Now, what that actually means is that if the water level sinks another 200 feet, water cannot pass through the dam, which means no electricity is going to be available. On top of that, the Colorado River and the reservoir here are used for water supplies for drinking, meaning that we are seeing shortages on water supplies that are available for people, especially when it comes to farming. The water in the area actually has lowered so much that there is a bathtub ring on the lake shores that marks how much water has retreated over time, as the dam is only at 36% full capacity, with the water level decreasing at a rate faster than previously projected, according to reports. The reservoir is considered at full capacity when the water rises to over 1,219 feet above sea level, but the current levels are at about 1,071 feet, meaning that over 140 feet of water has dropped off in the past 20 to 30 years. Now, it's frightening to see this happen so quickly, actually, because that is a significant amount of water disappearing. At least 4.5 million acres of farmland from Wyoming to the US-Mexico border use water from the Colorado River. About 70% of the water supports agriculture, which must be used to grow the country's winter vegetables. So this water supply is actually used to provide a lot of the food that we grow in the wintertime for the entire country. Meaning that if this water supply goes away, that's going to start shrinking food supplies. The federal governments actually plan to declare an official water shortage in Lake Mead as of August, which will result in large water cuts for New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. Lake Mead also generates all of this water, and Las Vegas obtains about 90% of its drinking water from Lake Mead, meaning that Las Vegas and some of the surrounding areas are going to struggle in terms of their water supplies, especially as these droughts start getting worse in the years to come. Representatives of the western states that rely on the Colorado River actually signed a contingency plan 2 years ago, and in doing so potentially designed a system to cut water to Arizona, Nevada, and California from Lake Mead until 2026 in order to allow these levels to start increasing again, especially if the levels continue to drop. Now, one of the things that people were calling for was for monsoons to come in. One person said, "We're just desperately looking for the forecast to see when monsoons might show up." So we actually got a monsoon in Flagstaff, Arizona, a lot further south, but still near the Colorado River, where actually there were flash floods on the Colorado River, meaning that the river was overflowing into the street. Parts of Arizona have been hit with devastating flooding within the city of Flagstaff, declaring a state of emergency after being inundated with torrents of water that turned streets into murky, fast-running streams. A Toyota Prius was seen swiftly being carried down a Flagstaff street with a raging swell of dark water. This area was pelted with rain in such levels that people were worried about it just pouring into their homes. If you look at some of the videos, if you decide to look that up after, the area was entirely flooded. There was water pouring down the streets, and people literally had sandbags put up in front of their buildings in order to make sure that water didn't enter into their property. The monsoon rains actually swelled the entire river up. This river that's been drying out, causing the flash flood that's also killed someone who was doing a rafting trip in the Grand Canyon. The flooding in Flagstaff appears to have been aided by the scars of a severe 2019 wildfire. And again, this is where all of this starts to cyclically work on itself, like I talked about last week. The forest fires have burned away vegetation, which has basically made it so that the water dragged all of the uprooted vegetation and all of the scraps into the area where people were. So debris is now laid out everywhere. And all of this stuff was from these forest fires. Now, the issue really comes down to the fact that long periods of dry weather can actually help fuel fires, leaving behind loose soil that can cause a wave of debris to flow when a sudden flood arrives. Basically, it just takes everything with it. And to make matters worse, the way that the ground works, because of how dry it is, it's actually difficult for water to seep back into the ground. And because it is difficult for the water to seep back into the ground, it ends up skimming across the surface instead of going into the ground, meaning that these floods actually get worse over time as the soil dries out more. Combine that with the fact that higher temperatures end up creating conditions where you can actually hold more water in the atmosphere, you end up getting larger rains that can't seep into the ground, which means that the only part of the soil that's going to get any water is maybe the very top levels of topsoil, which will quickly dry out from the high heat right after the monsoon, meaning that none of these areas are actually getting any sort of help in terms of hydrating the land, because it has actually gotten too dry to do so. The heavy rains have actually been following a period of intense wildfires, as I said, and that has caused mudslides and floods that have injured several hundred people and caused the evacuations of homes. And this is far from the only area of the world where this is happening. The climate crisis has been linked to the severe floods that are happening across Europe, especially in Western Germany and Belgium, where there was literally flooding going across the streets that looked like it was covering up at least the first floor of some buildings from the footage I saw. And that's a really disturbing thing to see, especially because of the amount of damage that that's going to cause to our habitats, but as well to the fact that this is not allowing the water to actually seep into the soil. So all of this water is just running off, and it isn't really helping any of the cause of what we want. It's not preventing the droughts, and it's not going to make things better in the short term or necessarily the long term. Climate scientists have actually warned that flooding will become more frequent in some places as the warming of the atmosphere allows more moisture, as I said. And again, that's just going to mean even worse rains. And because of all this, you have the debris, you have everything else pouring in and affecting people's lives. And the rainfall may provide a small amount of relief to reservoirs. It'll pour in directly. However, it needs to be noted that most of the water from reservoirs actually comes from snowpack. Snowpack is from the mountains in the area where it slowly is supposed to melt off and pour into the reservoirs. Unfortunately, because the temperatures have generally increased, there have been less snowpack, and therefore there has been less opportunity for these reservoirs to fill. And because of everything else that's occurring, these snowpacks are also melting earlier, pouring into the soil earlier, and are causing the soil to erode even quicker so that there's less time for that to happen. And it ends up drying out even quicker. And because of that, water then doesn't pour into the soil when these monsoons happen. And the process cyclically exacerbates on itself. And so what we really have here is a situation where the flooding looks like it's going to get worse and worse over time. And we're going to move into this area where there's kind of an ironic twist going on. These massive floods are actually not going to solve a drought problem. The truth of the matter is, we'd expect there to be a monsoon that would fix this, that would come in because of the heavy rains, the 3 or 4 inches of rain that would come down and just pour into these reservoirs. But the truth of the matter is that monsoons are not going to solve the drought problem. And because of the way they don't trickle into the soil, it's going to end up causing situations where a lot of the debris is being carried, and it's not actively going to fix the drought problem for the soil itself either, especially when high temperatures follow the monsoons and end up drying out the topsoil extremely quickly. Again, these floods may temporarily alleviate some of the problems, but the increased rain levels really can't penetrate this ground. And the debris being carried and everything else is just going to create dangerous conditions. This situation is unlikely to solve itself without several years of getting lucky with wet weather. That's more than likely not going to happen. And unless we seriously change how these water supplies like the Hoover Dam are being managed and operated, and whether or not the decision is properly implemented to cut back some of the water usage in certain areas, this is going to deeply affect the entire region. And this is just, again, another effect of climate change that has probably reached a point that's becoming completely irreversible, especially due to the decreased levels of snowpack. This is a sign of the new normal that's to come, and we better get used to it and find new ways to adapt to it. Because if we don't start creating the infrastructure around it, we don't start finding ways to start preserving our water supplies, we don't start figuring out ways to handle these issues, people are going to get severely hurt in time. And when that water supply in the Hoover Dam finally falls below that 200 feet and power is eliminated for 25 million people, we're not going to be able to recover from that. That will be too late. In fact, in a lot of ways, the damage that we've done already is too much. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.